Perfect. Welcome, Abbie.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us from the other side of the planet.
Well, thank you for inviting me from the other side of the planet. It's a treat.
Yeah, so just to start, could you tell us a bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, sure. Okay, great. My name's Abbie Rosner, and I live in Washington, D.C. And I was born in 1958, so that makes me 67 years old. And I am kind of on the tail end of the baby boomer generation. And so I grew up here in Washington. I went to Washington, D.C. public schools in the 1970s. And it was a time where drugs were everywhere. The hippies were kind of already, kind of burned out at that point, but we were still very much kind of a hippie culture. And so I did, smoked a lot of pot. We dropped acid, did that kind of thing. And then when I was in my 20s, I got married, I had children, and then for many, many decades, I didn't do any drugs. That was, it was a glass of wine in the evening, and so I then in the when I was in my 50s, in my I guess my late 50s, my marriage was ending and my children were out of the house, and I rediscovered cannabis. And this time, we used to do, when we did pot back in the day, it was a social thing. And, it kind of made me a little paranoid. It was never really that, fun. It was just what we did. And this time, when I was smoking pot in my 50s, it was a very different experience. It was like enlightening kind of, I was able to like it shifted the lens on my perspective. It made me, it lifted my mood, and it just was really, it felt like an ally. And I thought, I thought about it and I was like, why is it so different now? And I realized that for one thing, I was way more mature. I had, a belly full of life experience. I also had done, 1,000 hours of therapy. So I'd really worked on my stuff. And also I had a long time meditation practice. So I was really comfortable inside of my head. So that enabled me to, like instead of being, getting fear, whatever, I was able to just like really cruise along with this, in this altered state. But then when I turned 60 in 2018, I got for a birthday present Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. And that was really a big awakening for me. So one of the things that really stayed with me in that book was the stories of the terminal cancer patients who did psilocybin assisted therapy. And I just was like, oh my God, the stories of these people who were, paralyzed with anxiety and depression, because of their illness. All of a sudden, after the therapy, they're like, oh, well, that's the way of the world. And, death is just, the natural thing. And I love, it's all really all about love. And I love my people. And I thought, wow, if a psychedelic experience can really help with this most primal of all our fears, then this is something I really want to write about. And so, for my generation, for my people, because I felt like they need it would be helpful for them to understand this. So anyway, so I started to write a book about psychedelics and the end of life for older adults. And I well, not so quickly, but soon I discovered that really, I had one of these aha moments where I was like, well, wait a minute, why would you wait until you're at death's door to have an experience like this? Like, move it up a couple of decades. And I was like, well, maybe it's not just about having a good death, but maybe it's about how the quality of how you experience older age. And so that really was kind of, the where the light bulbs really, went ding ding. And so that's what I decided. I'm going to write about that. And I'd already, I had my own, psilocybin experience at 60. after 40 years of not having, experienced a psychedelic, and it was beautiful. And it was, it was, I felt like with the maturity of older age, I was so better prepared to really, appreciate and gain what this sacred medicine had to offer.
Mm.
So anyway, so I decided that I would, instead of me telling the story, let me go out and see if there's other older psychonauts out there. So I made that kind of my journalistic quest, and I ended up interviewing 36 older adults about their psychedelic experiences. So there were people of different ages, different medicines, different backgrounds. Some people, had done like me, had had experiences in the past and then put it away for decades. And some people, were coming to it for the first time in their 60s, their 70s. And many of them were saying, well, I read Michael Pollan's book and it just, it seemed like such a great idea. So anyway, so that was the origins of the book, and which is now coming out, and we can talk more about it, um, but that's the kind of the origin story of the book and of how I came to write it.
Wow, what a great journey. And I was thinking, what prompted you to get back into psychedelics? What was the...
Well, I think it was that realization that with a mature mind, I and with yeah, with maturity, I think I could understand, or I could navigate an altered state with more successfully, or more, meaningfully and more enjoyably. And
Mm,
also, but psychedelics in particular, I've always been, my whole life, I've been interested in the nature of consciousness. I'm a seeker, like so many of the people that I interviewed, like I'm sure you would identify yourself. We're asking the bigger questions. We're
mm.
kind of curious about, things beyond the boundaries. And I think that the idea that I could explore that with psychedelics was very appealing.
Yeah, that's what I've found with a lot of people that I've talked to in their 50s and later who
Hmm.
gone for a psychedelic is kind of they get to a bit of a dead end in regards to kind of self-exploration.
Right. Well, what I'd say is that, when you get to your 60s and your 70s, again, the big questions start to come up.
Mm,
Let's say your career's already, if you're still working, it's already going down. Your kids are grown. You're at this place in life where you're wondering, who am I? Have I lived my life authentically? And also, you're looking at, maybe you have 10, 20, 30 years ahead of you. Do I want to? A lot of people carry trauma. They think, do I really want to carry all this burden around for the rest of my life? Or it's like it's now or never. So
yeah.
people, I think they really want, in older age, the questions come up. From my perspective, when you approach psychedelics intentionally with those questions in mind, it can be a very, very powerful way to do this kind of work of what I call conscious aging.
Mm, that's a great term, conscious aging.
Mhm. Or conscious elder, it's for us to be conscious elders.
Would you so your early trips, um, I'm guessing when you were dropping acid, as you said, you were listening to Pink Floyd and whatnot, and you were at a party. But I'm guessing when you took it later, you were doing it kind of more intentionally. So you were taking this and with eye shades going in, or what was the circumstance?
Well, so, in the name of research, of writing my book, I've I've been very interested in all the, in the various settings that older adults are having these experiences. So I've done my own, just at home. I've also done ceremonies, with groups of, like outward facing ceremonies, and I've also done inward facing ceremonies. So I think there's, there's a place for everything.
Have you been to South America to access it, or?
I have not.
Okay.
I have not. That's, that's another thing about the older adults that of the people that I interviewed, maybe one or two had been to South America. It's really a kind of a local thing. I talk about it in sometimes that it's like, it's like tourism in a way. When you get older, you're not, so, when you're young, you don't, you put your backpack on your back and you head down to Peru and you go down to, the Iquitos or wherever you go to and you do, you do all the, when you're 16, you're 17, it's like, I don't know about that. So, but you can, it's like a different kind of tourism. Oh, let me try this medicine and let's see where it'll take me. It's some exotic locale in
Yeah.
my head,
Yeah. They call it a trip for a
it's
reason, don't they?
what?
Call it a trip for a reason.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It's, it's a trip without the hassle of the airport.
Again, from the perspective of an elderly person in Australia, obviously we discussed before the TGA has changed these things, but it's specifically for, they say, treatment-resistant depression, so TRD,
Right,
and
right,
the other one is MDMA for PTSD, which are
correct.
very, very, very narrow slithers.
Right.
What I'm finding very interesting is in Australia, 1 in 7 people are taking an antidepressant, which is
Mm,
huge,
yeah.
millions of people.
I'm
Absolutely.
sure it's more in America.
Yeah, I've read it's something like 1 in 5, 1 in 5
Probably.
in America, which is absolutely, it's an incredible statistic in itself. But
Uh-huh.
as we kind of talked before about, unfortunately, the medicines that are prescribed for depression at the moment, things like SSRIs,
Hmm.
they're not really curative. Well, they're not really getting at the root cause. They say that you get on an SSRI and then you can change bits of your life, get therapy and other things.
Hmm.
But with psychedelics, it seems that they're causing this thing called neuroplasticity. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and maybe about how neuroplasticity changes over as you age.
Okay, well, that's a great question. It's a big issue, and I don't know if you're familiar with Gould Dolan. She's an
Oh.
amazing researcher at UC Berkeley, and she takes big issue with the term neuroplasticity because she does say that, neuroplasticity is not necessarily a good thing.
Mm.
But I think that in general, what we're talking about is an opening of uh, 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 really what she's talking about is opening critical windows for learning. So that's for older adults, we tend in older age to get kind of fixed in our ways. And so the opportunity to suddenly see things outside of the way that you've believed things to be for decades is can be a powerful shift. And what I know I've experienced, you may have experienced as well, and this is talked about a lot, is that it's not the journey so much. You have the journey and it's interesting and there's, all these weird things and beautiful things, but afterwards, it's the week afterwards where you're just, you're you feel like your mind is opened and that the insights that you had or the insights continue to come, and that is, for an older mind, that's gold. It's really it's such a, I say this over and over again. I really believe that for older adults, for the work that we need to do to make peace with ourselves, to find resolution, to understand the context of what it is to be in this world, to have a life, and also as, to find resolution as you move towards the end of your life. I just believe that psychedelics are a beautiful, beautiful tool for that, for doing that kind of work. If if again, if you approach it responsibly.
When I started researching it, I thought of what cohort of people would benefit the most from this. And if you look at younger ages, 18 to
Mhm.
35, there's still neuroplasticity there. Whereas
Right.
I'm now 42 and
Mm-hmm.
I'm feeling that neuroplasticity close.
Mm.
Just having that ability to open your mind
I
and
know, isn't it
get out
great?
of these repeating loops, I think that
Mm.
kind of get put into the subconscious, um,
Right.
is is such a godsend. And
Right.
just at the beginning there, you talked about Gul Dolan, who I think is fantastic. You know, giving ecstasy to an octopus.
I know she'll never live that one down, but
Yeah,
she's brilliant. She's
right.
brilliant anyway.
I want to build a statue to her with an octopus with some ecstasy. Um, but you touched on something that we talk a lot about in at the Australian Psychedelic Society in Sydney, which is neuroplasticity is not always a good thing. And
Mm,
whenever I talk about psychedelics, there's often a period of like exaltation of these things are extremely, they're incredible. However, there is this kind of there's other sides to medicines. You know, water, if you drink too much of it, becomes a poison. And I think there's something in pharmacy and medicine is, you know, every molecule
right,
is a poison at a certain
of
level.
course.
And
Hmm.
um, psychedelics famously have been compared by Professor David Taylor Nutt as safer than horse riding.
Right.
But that does avoid the thing of, well, people in horse riding, what does that mean? Is it those people died? Is it their quality of life that was affected? I think it's a little bit of an simplification. And I think in regards to neuroplasticity, sometimes when you become neuroplastic and then you go back home and you start watching YouTube reels on flat Earth theory, for instance,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
um, on things that kind of move you away from what you're intending. There's a
Hmm.
great word called apophenia, which
Hmm.
is when you become neuroplastic, you make connections to things that aren't necessarily there.
Hmm.
What we found, and I think maybe what you get to in your book, is one way to kind of keep it in check, in that you don't become isolated and go off into these weird tangents, is maintaining a community.
Hmm.
And this is where my work, I've really felt a calling in how can we get like-minded psychonauts who have gone through
Hmm.
these experiences or who are going through these experiences, and they might be in these neuroplastic windows of, you know, 14 days after
Hmm.
with LSD and psilocybin, or
Hmm.
ibogaine, the neuroplastic window is a lot longer. How
Right.
can we get them together? Um, Potentially do integration sessions, but I'm more, how can we uh, build a community of people who do events, people who go for walks. Uh,
Hmm.
we're doing a dating night, and how can we get people to work together to kind of make a new, I don't know, a new kind of shared reality, a new consensus in their mind.
Right.
They can each kind of like reinforce one another, and we've done that somewhat with the suppers, which has been
Right. I know. It sounds like you've really initiated something beautiful. Well, so how did you know that this is my favorite topic? So I've had this vision for a couple of years now, which I'm actually going to I think once the book is out, I'm really going to work on making it happen. It's called I have this idea of creating what I call elder vision circles. And it's an idea where you take a group of, of older adults, 8 to 10 or something like that, and you give them a curriculum of study. So there's reading material and there's discussions and everybody, and the reading material is about conscious aging, like what is this work of being an elder? And also about altered states, like other cultures, because one of the things that we haven't touched on, but that's really important, is that these are sacred medicines. They're, we have to remember that in the cultures that we have, we've inherited these medicines from, that we can also understand that they're sacred and that we need to honor them and practice sacred reciprocity. So all of those concepts would be studied by the cohort. The group would study and discuss. Then there would be a mindfulness meditation component. So the group would meditate together. They would commit to meditating. There would be a community service component. So the group would choose a project or, to some kind of political activism or giving into the community, something where they're giving back. And then they would prepare together for a journey. And so let's say after 3 months or 4 months, they'd all go off to wherever it was legal or not, and have a psilocybin journey together.
Mm,
And then they'd come home and they'd meet and they'd integrate. And then they would start another cycle where they'd
mm,
read more and they'd meditate more and they'd do more community service and then they journey again. But it would be a perpetuating community. And what the beauty of this for older adults is that there's so much isolation and depression and alienation and lack of meaning in older adults' lives. And this would be built in to create these communities of mutual support. So, you've got friends and you've got fun and you've got purpose in your lives and you're caring for each other and you're meeting with other elder vision circles and like the sky's the limit. So that's something that I really, because the community, we touch on it over, you came to, we're all coming to it from different directions, but it's the connection that these experiences bring it to when we share them together. It's just so valuable. And I've been in so many ceremonies where everybody, comes out in the end, everybody loves each other and we just, we all love each other so much. And then everybody goes home and then it's gone. And this is a way that you can maintain that cohesion as a community and build on it.
definitely, definitely. And I can't tell you the amount of friendship groups that I've seen come out of the psychedelic scene.
Hmm.
How people bond together and they do stuff. It's really beautiful. I mean, when I was a pharmacist, I'd give out pills every day, and one thing I kind of noticed after 10 odd years was people weren't really coming in for their medicines; they were coming in for a chat.
Well, that's why they go to doctors.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
who's gonna listen to them and care for them and let and
yeah.
except that the doctor has no time and patient or bandwidth for them, but that's what they're going for.
And I hate to be cynical, but you can't. The way that modern medicine works is you need randomized controlled trials, which cost something like $100 million.
Of course.
No one is ever going to do a randomized controlled trial for having a chat with someone, or as you
Of
said,
course.
meditation or social. It's not in that framework, and I think
Right.
it's really important, if people are on antidepressants, to really have a look at those external factors. Not just this is something biologically wrong with me. There's
Hmm.
some disorder. I think
Right.
they're changing the environment is really 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 great. One thing that's kind of unexplored, that we haven't talked about, is Alzheimer's and dementia.
Oh,
There,
right.
there was a really interesting
Yes.
viral post. Um,
Yes, yes,
we
yes.
we looked into it.
I wrote about it on my
Did you?
Substack.
And
Yeah,
what
yeah.
did
Oh, you know what? I read because I read all this stuff immediately. I mean, I read that study when it first came out. I was like, oh my God.
me too.
So anyway, I've read a lot of stuff about it, and I've talked to some of the it's a
Unique.
unique thing. And what I wrote in my Substack was that the medical establishment, what they say is, oh, this is really terrible because she didn't give informed consent. And, her caregivers decided that they could give her a big dose. And I agree, that there's that issue. But to me, what was more interesting was that, as you said, that became viral, right? So
Yeah.
tons, everybody, People magazine, everybody's writing about this woman with Alzheimer's who, had this miraculous, experience after 5 grams of mushrooms. And so what my take on it was is that things go out into the world and we have no control over that. People are going to read that and they're going to go and somebody's going to go and give their even though it's like don't do this at home, but somebody's going to give their
Yeah. Yeah.
loved one with dementia mushrooms. They were already doing it. And all I can say is that I'm happy that mushrooms are relatively not risky. It's not a risky, it's not like giving MDMA, which can, set your blood pressure going. People are going to do it. It's just going to happen. And we'll see. And it really goes back in a way, and maybe I shouldn't be saying this. Psilocybin's a mushroom. It comes from the earth. To me, it's our natural birthright to be able to heal with a mushroom. And there can be laws around how legal it is to relate to that mushroom. Or there are going to be people that are going to decide that you have to use this mushroom this way or that way. And we can take all of that into account, but to me, ultimately, it's a mushroom. And so people are just going to decide what they do. And psilocybin mushrooms are illegal in the United States, except for in 2 states and or three now. But this is the thing about older adults. They are responsible enough, they learn enough, they read enough, and then they make their own risk-benefit assessment. They
Yeah.
decide, okay, I've read it, I've I'm willing to, I understand my medical condition, I understand that it's illegal, I am willing to take the risk because this is my life and I'm 70 years old and I don't give a darn about what other people say. This is what I want to do. And that's what's going to happen also with the Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody knows if that's going to be a cure or not, but
Yeah.
did make a big splash.
Yeah. 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 Just on the informed consent aspect of it,
Hmm.
I think it's really good for the person to be knowledgeable about it. I mean, in
Mm.
this case, whether he should have given it in medical ethics, if you haven't got that type of consent, you shouldn't really do it. I mean, it's amazing the recovery that she did, and maybe that kind of, sorry, that um, beginning may. I was thinking because I'm doing this lecture on psychedelics and aging.
Hmm.
Wouldn't it be interesting to give people kind of cards which say, "I have been um, informed by the Australian Psychedelic Society about the potential benefits of psilocybin, and I
Hmm.
consent for their administration in the event that this
Well,
occurs."
that's exactly what I wrote in my Substack was
Oh,
that
really?
when we do our advanced directives, when we
Oh,
like say
directed.
what
Yeah,
kind
yeah,
that you should put in it that yeah, and I agree to having psilocybin.
yeah.
That was actually the point of my Substack.
Oh, wow, 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 wow.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
just I was thinking,
it's
yeah, advanced directed. I didn't know that was a big
well,
thing.
that's a thing for old, when you get old, then you
Yeah,
older, then that's one of these things that you have to do because, something could happen and then you want to make sure they don't, put you on a ventilator when you don't want that. So it's just a matter of, but I want to say that, do you know psychedelic alpha?
yes,
It's Josh Hardman. So he did a fabulous interview with the doctor who wrote that, who published that piece with
really.
about the Alzheimer patient. He
Yeah,
he went back and spoke with him. It's really worth if you're interested, and it's very worthwhile
and I'll
to
put a link
follow
below
up
this.
on that.
I'll put a link below this video to that. So
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, and they actually went on and dosed her several other times.
yeah.
That same woman.
It,
You
it,
know,
what
we
I'm
can we can sit on our pedestal and go, oh, bad ethics, bad ethics. But this guy, he said, they had their own ethical considerations and they were comfortable with them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, again, that really picks up jurisdiction as well. If you're in Australia, there's different laws and ethical requirements as to what would
We're in
happen.
Brazil. This was in Brazil
Yeah,
where this, I mean, it wasn't okay by Brazilian rule either, I think. But I don't know. It's worth reading that piece. Very, very interesting.
yeah. I'm doing some research at the moment and trying to dig into real world evidence as well. So, are there cases on Erowid, which is
Yes, I
a
know Airwood.
repository, just for the viewers, it's just
Oh, oh,
Erowid
right.
repository of trip reports
Mhm.
from various different people. They don't always tend to put in their age, which is a bit frustrating.
Mhm.
But I'd love to find a few in there about people who are suffering from Alzheimer's. But if they got Alzheimer's, they probably wouldn't go down the route of being on the internet and researching what the best thing is.
Well, maybe their families are.
Yeah.
Several of the people that I interviewed in my book were dealing with spouses with Parkinson's, that were dying of Parkinson's disease.
Mm.
And they did medicine with their spouse. They did the spouse did medicine. The family did it together, all dealing with, these neurodegenerative diseases of aging.
Abby, I don't want to ruin your book, but out of the 36, what was the most interesting case for you? What was the
Oh,
most?
you won't ruin my book. Each one, I could, it's like asking, what was your favorite child? I love them all the same. Um, but I mean, there were very interesting ones. There was a guy that I just, one of the first people that I interviewed. To this day, and I'm going to meet him soon. I'm so excited. He's in California. He told me that he was 100% disabled with PTSD. A man in his 50s. He said he just his horrible upbringing, the trauma. He's just said I don't even talk about it. He said, but it was horrible. And he tried to enroll in a MAP study for MDMA for PTSD. And they didn't enroll him. And so he just said, okay, well, I'm just going to do my own clinical trial. And he got some MDMA. He called it vitamin M. He got his vitamin M and he hunkered down. He read the protocol and he started doing sessions. And he said he has a life now. I mean, it was incredible, incredible transformation. And painful, terrible, not terrible, just really, really, just very deep, deep work. But, he's now in his, late 60s and, he's never been happier in his life. And was a theme that I heard over and over again is people saying, I have never been happier, more joyful, more myself in my life. And this goes against everything that we hear about older age. That, it's a time of decline and it's, you're irrelevant and it's all downhill. And here are these people, they're telling me, I have my people, my tribe, I'm having a great time. I'm, having fabulous sex and I'm having all this great intimacy, and all this, and I'm really, getting this deep understanding of, it's like, this is older life. This is what older life can be.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And isn't it so important when someone's worked all of their life and got to 65, and then yeah, the the decline, and then
Right. And it doesn't have to be that. That's the happy news of all
wow,
this.
wow, and that makes me so
That's
excited,
what
so excited,
it's
so excited.
it's a very optimistic message.
Where can we get your book?
Well, it's on, I mean, let's tell my publisher to publish it in Australia, but you can order it online. I don't know if it'll be in bookstores in Australia, but it's out on July 7th.
Okay, July 7th. Great, great. I
Yes.
will look forward to it. Well, Abby, thank you
Yeah.
so much for your time.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation and thank you and greetings to all of my, people. I mean, when we talk about community and connection, I think that these experiences have really brought me to connect with my tribe of people. And I love that my tribe is now extending all the way to Australia. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much.